You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and very excited to have a panel of guests here, artists who work in ceramics, Magdolene Dykstra, Natalia Arbelaez, Habiba El-Sayed, and Heidi McKenzie, who have done a presentation of this sort in the past, but what we really want to get into is discussing what the Canon is in the art field and what do we do about it, and whose interest does it serve, and what needs to happen. I'd like each of my guests to introduce themselves to you, my listeners. I'm going to start with a friend of yours from a prior episode, Magdolene Dykstra. Welcome back to the program. So happy to have you, and thanks for bringing your artist friends. Tell us about yourself, Magdalene.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah. Well, my name's Magdolene Dykstra, and I am based in St. Catharines, Ontario. I'm an artist educator. I just finished a visiting artist in residence position at Concordia University in Montreal. But since then, I've returned to St. Catharines as my home base. My work currently occupies two positions. On one side of my work, I use clay, often in an unfired way, to meditate on the vast number of human beings that are on the planet. And then on the other side, the other position my work is occupying is finger paintings. So works on paper where I use my fingerprint to create fields of color.
Yeah. And again, welcome back, Magdalene. Natalia Arbelaez, the listeners would love to hear from you.
Yes, I'm Natalia Arbelaez. I'm currently in Pomona, California, doing a residency at AMOCA, where I'm studying, researching their permanent collection to highlight women of color who played an important part in ceramic history. And so right now I'm just doing the research part and also making in their studio. But normally I live in Brewster, New York, and where I actually kicked off that project at Mad Museum in New York City, where I actually did make the physical pieces of that work. So yeah. And I do various work. So that's a current project that I'm working on. I also do a lot of work about immigration and history weaved in with contemporary influences, speaking of my American upbringing, combined with my Colombian ancestry.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to say I've seen all of your art, and I'm really humbled. You're just excellent artist, and I'm very excited for this conversation. Habiba El-Sayed.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
My name is Habiba El-Sayed. I am living and working in Toronto, Ontario. I rent studio space in Toronto's East End, in like a really vibrant, diverse neighborhood. So that's really awesome. My practice is very diverse. I do everything from performance art to durational works. I do some sculptural work as well, and most recently some design work, and have been just finished up a commission of 650 mugs. So that was quite a task for me. But in my contemporary art practice, I mainly focus on perception and the way people of color view themselves, view the world, and the way the world views them in return. I used to use a bunch of different techniques, some traditional, some not so traditional, to talk about my different things. I also do some pottery instruction as well, which I'm very excited to get back to once pandemic stuff has sort of blown over a little bit.
Yeah, Habiba, thank you for your art. And last but not least, Heidi McKenzie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ken. So I am based in Parkdale, in the West End in Toronto, and I have a basement studio where I generate most of my work. I have been, I guess I'm kind of I call this a late bloomer in the sense that I came to clay as a third career, and I finished my MFA in 2014 at OCAD-U. And I have been, I think I'm an abstractionist in my heart and in my soul. And I started working in sculpture before I even made bowls or cups. And so my whole practice has been kind of about expressing who I am autobiographically through art. And I have moved on, more recently. I started working with photography on clay in 2014. And I guess in the last few years, I have moved on to look more closely at memory, race, migration, and ancestry, and my own mixed Indo-Trinidadian, Indo-Caribbean, because I've found out more recently that my father's roots are Guyanese, and my mother's roots, which are Irish American. And I think it's just, I've spent a lot of time during COVID doing a lot of genealogical research and uncovering a lot of facts that people in my family might not have known, or certainly people in my generation, both sides of my family, might not have known. And I'm just starting to re-input that into the new body of work.
Yeah, and thank you, Heidi. And about questions of identity, the process you describe, I've gone into that myself just recently, and quite honestly, without specifics, encountering things that say I am not who I was, and I might be something different, and what does that mean? And that's been a daily experience for me. I'm comfortable with it, but it is a strange and different type of experience. Okay, so we're talking about the canon, right? And so, for me, I went, when I went to college, I got things were changing. I went to college in the 90s. Things were changing, but gosh, they were. The discourse was like, oh, that means you're getting rid of Shakespeare, right? I was an English lit guy. Shakespeare's gone. The cultural wars are happening. But for me, I want to know, particularly in your field and for the listeners in ceramics, which is something that you've talked about in addressing the canon. What is the canon in ceramics? Who's there? And who is noticeably absent?
I can start addressing that question. I'll just speak to my experience as a student, and both in ceramics and the larger fine arts fields that I was studying. And the canon, to me, the story that was told of where the field has been, and therefore where it might continue going, basically embodied the idea of white as default. All the artists, with maybe a few exceptions, all the artists I was being exposed to as examples of this is what an artist looks like, this is what a ceramicist looks like, were white, and often they were men. And it became really exhausting to never see an example of someone who looks like me, a woman who is not a white woman, being held up as an example of expertise, an example of achievement. So for me, that's where I come in with the canon. I'm coming to it with a level of exhaustion of it being so limited.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to mention, I had seen your presentation in on disrupting the canon, and one of the things that was so frustrating for me was there's so much to go into here, and obviously we got a podcast to do, but there's so much to get into here, and the wonderful examples that you would show of like women who traversed like the sea, made it over, held the family together, and all these stories. And it's like, well, I got a couple minutes to tell you about this amazing artist that you don't know about. And I understand that frustration because even myself looking to see it as a viewer. Natalia, oh, I'm sorry, Heidi, about the canon, your thoughts.
Well, I just wanted to build on what Magdalene was saying, which is, for me, it started, or the seeds of me wanting to work around race and redress and putting women of color forefront on the stage started almost 25 years ago. And I started working in arts policy, and I did my first graduate degree in arts policy. And so more than exhaustion, it was outrage, because at that time in the arts councils in Canada, artists of color were literally being shuffled and funneled into folk arts, community arts, and multicultural arts. And we were not, encouraged to, although we were not denied, we were certainly not encouraged to be applying in mainstream visual arts, theater, dance, literature, etc. And I mean, that just ignited outrage, like rage, actually rage. Let's just call it rage. And so then, I did go and study about the first, settler communities, the largest immigrant communities in the UK and France, and where their arts policies came from, and how systemically racist they were, and trying to understand where we are in Canada. And anyway, I did end up briefly working in arts policy, but things have obviously shifted enormously in the last couple of decades. But I think for me, that was the genesis, and that when I became an artist, or I came to clay as a medium, it just has fueled that passion, because again, as Magdalene had mentioned, the stage has been largely white dominated, and specifically Eurocentric, settler dominated.
Yeah. I feel that my work has always been filling a gap that I've been feeling in art history and academia and in research. So, it started looking at Central and South American ceramics, because in academia, those were like the glanced over histories that we were looking. It was like Africa, South and Central, and Amerindian art was all just one chapter briefed over. Other countries got their whole chapter. China got a whole chapter. England. And I remember in my history class, like correcting the teacher because a lot of the information he just didn't know as well. So it started with that, of like wanting to fill this gap that I was feeling. And then eventually it turned into the women of color in contemporary ceramics that I was not seeing. So I started researching myself as well to fill that gap for myself and for academia and the field. So, as I was going through Mad Museum's collection, they only have 11 women of color in their ceramic permanent collection. And that's 11 women to their 11 Volcus pieces. So there's definitely a huge gap. And I'm hoping with the work that I'm doing that I'm bringing attention while also celebrating what a lot of these women have already done and have been here doing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Natalia. Habiba.
Yeah, just to add to those things, I mean, I think I had very similar experiences in my education experience of, not feeling represented, or not, just seeing just one side of the coin. What I also thought was really bizarre, even at that time, was just how so much of our narratives were being told by the white gaze, by white men, and how often there was a lot of appropriation of our techniques, of our ideas, of our stories, and that being presented as like some new and amazing thing coming from a white artist, while never actually like learning about the artists who actually developed those things, or if we did very, very briefly. Um, so that was something that always stuck out to me, and something that I'm really glad that we're beginning to shift.
Yeah. And on the question about in getting into, part of the in this big topic is establishing and then disrupting or deconstruction, of the canon. And I wanted to mention one thing that I heard in your comments about the whether it's the artist of renown, white male, or whether it's the professor, whether it's this dominant. I work in K to 12 education. That's such just a huge issue, right? Of like going to school and not seeing anybody who has inflections that you do or movements or language. And then I talk to folks and say, well, imagine going to school and never encountering any literature that resembles you and never encountering topics, and not even to mention math or science and some of those biases. But the canon is the canon, and that's the frustration you're working in now. So in disrupting the canon, is it do we have to start again, or is the disruption to break pieces and to create space into what's there?
I mean, I think the canon is not the canon. It's not some unmovable, permanent structure. I think that's where I'd like to start. And
Thank you, by the way.
yeah, I mean, you brought up the idea of earlier. You said, "Well, do we have to throw out Shakespeare?" And no, we don't have to throw out people who have been held up as experts, but I think we could think about the idea of biodiversity in our canon. We know, like scientifically, we know biodiversity helps the strength of ecosystems. So how is that not applicable to the stories we tell about what art counts and what art should be looked up to, which artists we should be looking up to? I think biodiversity in our canon can only help to fuel our field.
I think it's also like, I mean, you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. It's important to look at our history, and part of that history is the canon and the way it's been used to sort of suppress the ideas of people of color in this field. And I think looking at that can actually help generate some new ideas and some new really interesting work as well. But I think it's important to constantly be looking back and seeing where we can build. And as you mentioned about, maybe breaking it into pieces or making space, I think that's kind of exactly what's happening. That BIPOC have sort of made their own seat at the table. They, whether or not they were invited, just came on in and said, like, we're going to disrupt the structure a little bit. And that's kind of exactly what you see happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just again, I don't feel that we need to throw out the canon again. So to come back to your question, Ken, something that Natalia said, I was thinking about, when I studied ceramic history, and it was actually a fairly significant section on South American and Latin American ceramics, just because my professor had particular interest in it. But the point is that it was taught from the perspective of the white archaeologist who discovered, and it wasn't taught from a sense of cultural ownership. And so what I think we've been seeing over the last year, since the Black Lives Matter sort of broke apart this, internationally, this awakening around race and racialization in all sectors, not just the art sectors of the world. I think, what we're seeing is people starting to say, hey, we're not going to have systemic change unless we break those glass ceilings, unless we put people of color in positions that can make decisions and that aren't making decisions for us. So I've been really heartened. I mean, just in the last few months, I follow all the arts listings, and there has been a number of curators of color appointed across Canada. It's really exciting to see an Indigenous curator. So those are the shifts that have to happen to really, I think, disrupt the canon in a sustained way.
Yeah. Natalia?
Yeah, I talk a lot about authority, and I guess I've curated a few shows, and I'm doing archiving and research, and it's been a long journey of taking the authority to say that I'm a researcher, I'm a curator, and this is what I'm doing. And I think the canon for so long has made me feel that because I'm not a professional, or has given me, what's that complex of imposter syndrome. So I've been fighting against that, of like saying like, yeah, I could be a curator, historian, archivist, and telling younger artists as I visit schools, like, you could do this too. Like, you have to take this authority upon yourself and do this work, because this is what has been done for so long. But now it's our turn to take that authority.
I see the work. I wanted to ask a question in general. I see the art and what you're doing as an artist, looking to disrupt and to engage in this. But I also look at all of you as having another kind of face as intellectuals, as intellectuals of color, engaging in the issues conceptually around the canon. So there's also that. I see that within the academy, having gone to the university and college and all the space that's there. So when you speak to this as well, it sounds to me that you have another front or another presentation, like my professor looks like this and is presenting this. Do you encounter that just like in the circles where you're having these discussions, the intellectual circles?
I think like so much of this topic and the canon is based in institutions and and systems that have been around for so long, and I think it's really hard to have this conversation only within the context of like the work I make, and not think about the institutions that I'm a part of or that I've come from and that I hope to be part of. So yeah, I think that oftentimes I'm talking about this with other students, or when I'm giving giving an artist talk or something. There's a lot of other academics present, so that we are thinking about this beyond just the arts, but we're thinking about sort of these structures and how we can disrupt them. And as Heidi mentioned about um, putting people of color in roles that are decision-making roles, that are at other levels in these institutions as well. We're not just talking about at the, showing art. It's also about like who is deciding what art is being shown, who's deciding what these shows are about, and what's happening in our residencies and happening in our courses and stuff like that. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, but that's kind of where I go with it.
Yeah. It was just in the sense that engaging in these questions too. Like, first of all, I know, like, I do a philosophy podcast, right? So you either have to be drawn to discussing philosophy or asking, why is there something, rather than, like, you have to be within that. And I've trained in, like, look at me, my education, philosophy, it's all white men. My philosophy and stuff, everything's self-taught as far as anything else. So that's what the canon is. What the canon is to me. So there's all that additional work. I wanted to ask you about your experience in identification, this large issue as far as identifying persons of color in at this time and place, and the power structures that exist kind of being like moving to appropriate. What I'm getting to is the possibility of like identity-driven work being used to exoticize or to get back in the same power dynamic that already exists. Do you fear that? Is that an active issue in doing identity-driven work or disrupting the canon?
I can jump on that question. I mean, for me, I've never really felt driven to make work about my experience being a second generation Egyptian. I've never felt that that was the driving energy behind my work. And I used to think, oh, well, is there something wrong with me? Because when I look around, especially now at this particular moment, work that deals with identity in whichever form is being really eaten up right now. And so for me, I went digging in art history, and I went looking for other artists who felt similar pressures and responded in a way that is similar to how I'm responding, which is I am not just a brown woman. I am not just a second generation Egyptian. My identity is much broader than that. And so with that, that comes through in my work in terms of particularly with my finger paintings. Like they're composed with my imprint, right? So in a way, they're very much about my identity. It is my fingerprint composing those works. But there's a level of abstraction and opacity between me and the viewer. Like, yeah, it's my fingerprint, which contains very personal information, very, very specific information to me, but it's not easily legible. It could be anyone's fingerprint, right? Unless you have some police scanner or something like that. Yeah, so for me, that is a question I'm asking in my work. It's a question that I'm asking myself as I make my work, is what I should say.
I wanted to ask each one of you about politics. Natalia, are you a political artist? Are you forced to be a political artist because of your position?
I think I never thought of myself that way until like 2016, 17, where here in America, when Trump started running and then was elected, and it was very much in the media, and it was this climate of being patriotic towards hating immigrants and hating people from Central and South America or countries of brown people immigrating over. So my work started to shift then. I've always made work about identity, and it wasn't necessarily, where I came from. I would talk about experiences of, what it is to start a family, to be a mother and have a family. So different aspects and just navigating the world as well, like as a woman. But it shifted then as I felt like a responsibility to talk about immigrants and immigration and talk about like the cultural richness that immigrants bring to America. So I started talking about that and, about the hardworking people that come over to America to pick your food and gather your food and serve your food and kind of help the whole structure of America. So I started making work about that and show what having a family here brings to America. So it shifted from that. So I think the politics at the time really made it like I had to address that because it was threatening my way of life and my family and my culture's way of life.
Absolutely. Habiba, you forced to be a political artist, or how do you view it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think of it as being, well, I guess it is kind of forced in a sense, because I think as a Muslim woman and for most of my adult life, I was, as I said, visibly Muslim is how I often term it, because I was covering my hair and people could tell. I felt like my existence was politicized. The way I choose to dress and the decisions I choose to make were often, part of politics and policies that were being, put out. Especially, like we know about like the hijab ban that, was, I guess, recently passed in France, but it had similar debates over that here in Canada, in Quebec. So oftentimes I kind of thought about it that way, that how my very existence is political, and therefore the work that I make ends up being political. Sometimes, that's a little bit more direct with the type of work that I make, where I'm directly talking about policy. And then there's other times where, I'm more talking about identity. But there is still, I think, politics within that I can't really shake, even if I wanted to.
Sure, sure. Magdalene, political? You forced to be political?
That's such a hard question. I want to say no, and responding in that way and saying no, I refuse to be forced into a certain definition is a political stance. I mentioned earlier, I looked into art history for my own permission givers to make work that wasn't overtly political. And I've chosen Alma Thomas as one of my art moms. And in similar to what she did, in continuing to use abstraction as a layer of opacity in performing my identity. So not letting the viewer have everything about me, I think is a political stance, but it's a political stance that puts forward my right to self-determination as an artist. Like, just because I am a woman of color, I do not have to make work to satisfy a hunger that has awoken right now for identity-oriented work. So my answer to your question, am I forced to be a political artist, is no. I choose to make work that adopts a political stance by saying I don't have to do what anyone else is telling me to do.
Yeah. Heidi?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And I've been listening to the others and thinking about what I want to respond it. But it's so personal. I really started thinking about this responsibility of an artist to be political in their work when I have worked and shared the stage with Jeffrey Thomas, who is a Six Nations photographer, senior, decorated photographer, and his son, Bear Witness, who's the lead in A Tribe Called Red. And both of those individuals have, spoken at length around the responsibility that they have as Indigenous peoples and artists to be political in their art. And that really started me thinking about my own art, which again began as sort of self-portraits. And as I'm moving through my career, it's extended to my ancestral roots. And I think as I've started to write and research and uncover more of my family's history, and within the last 5 years, I lost both my parents, but I have been learning more about them and their history and things that they never told me. So I don't want to be long-winded about it, but I can't help but think how I found out, after my father died, that he was integrally involved in the race riots and protests in Canada in 1969 in Concordia, what was then, Sir George Williams, and that, in 1966, he was working at Laurentian University, and his lab was burned down, and bricks thrown in their apartment and human excrement left on their doorstep, and that he never spoke of these things to me. And I grew up in this white bubble on the east coast of Canada, where really, honestly, there were so few people of color that I don't think people really even knew how to be racist. I didn't understand my otherness until I moved to Toronto at the age of 19 and immediately became, a focal point for racial slurs and on the receiving end of the kind of negative energy that one can experience around race and color and racialization in this country. So, I mean, that's a long-winded answer, and I think that it comes back to my early statement when we started the conversation, that there is a rage and there's an outrage and there's a sense of these stories need to be told because they're underrepresented, and they can be told through art.
Yeah, I wanted to just bring up a general, just get your general impressions about the question of hope or thrill about what's going on. I personally am thrilled about the potential for discourse, and I believe that the younger generation is deeply and radically calling out bullshit on a way of interacting with humans that is racism. I think there's an aggressiveness to younger folks that are saying this bullshit narrative doesn't hold. And that feels different to me. So that gives me hope because I feel that. But for all of you, lot of stuff here. But what's going on, whether it's your art or what you're seeing in response to your art, what are you seeing that's hope, us moving us forward, disrupting the canon, granting space? What are each of you seeing that gives you that?
Okay, I mean, for me, it's actually what you said just a moment ago, Ken, that young folks aren't waiting anymore. They're demanding, they're taking their own authority and taking action to make sure that they feel safe in the spaces that they are moving through. Like students, for example, are demanding that the staff, faculty, the community in their schools, they're demanding that the people around them allow them to feel safe, and that behavior that isn't, they're calling out behavior that is no longer acceptable. They're calling out the patterns of white as the default. And I think the fact that this is such a multi-noded sort of a multi-noded resistance, like it's happening in so many places. It's a strong momentum because of that. It's a whole network pushing in a better direction.
And before others chime in, I wanted to also say, since it's an open question, I don't mean to exclude an option. You can be not hopeful. That's a reasonable, response to the situation as well. Others, hope. What are you feeling as far as moving forward, Habiba?
Yeah, for me, it's like after giving a talk or having students reach out to me through social media or email to just let me know that they feel seen, like to me that is one of the most hopeful things to see, and it's such a rewarding part of this career, because I remember being exactly in their spot where I would go to, we have these big ceramic conferences, and just seeing all the presenters are basically white artists, and feeling so not represented, not only in the presenters but in the work that I was seeing in the exhibitions, especially the main exhibitions for that conference, and having students tell me that they feel seen and they feel like they can do this, is something that is so incredible. But also seeing organizations, Natalia should speak on it, like the Color Network, that are creating space for artists of color, and then organizations like Pot LA, based in California, obviously, who at the beginning of this pandemic, like I've been following them for a while, and I was just so inspired by the way they approached it of putting their staff first and making sure that people of color have you know steady jobs in ceramics, and also that they're providing um, instruction to students of color as well. And organizations like that sort of are run and led by BIPOC and are making space for them, to me is so incredibly hopeful and exciting to see. And seeing them get traction is incredible to see as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Natalia?
yeah.
Hope?
I have hope, and and I feel like I'm hoping to do my part in the community, and I'm an organizer for the Color Network, which is a networking database, mentorship, place to ask, and we curate shows, and it's run by just people of color. So yeah, and we've been curating a few shows, and I think what is important is like thinking about multi-generational artists of older artists to not forget the work that has been done and has been done for us, and current artists, and then the younger artists that are coming up. So, and I think that gives me hope, and then just developing these really rich relationships that have come from running that organization and organizing and seeing other artists, creating really great relationships from that has been really hopeful. And I think what we're doing, and like I think it's important to look at organizations like that to see where the future, how to approach shows in the future, or how to go forward. Right now we're really pushing to have non identity, make sure that we have some non-identity shows, because right now it's very popular with a lot of places across, I think I'd say for the Americas, of having shows about specifically just identity. So we're making sure to have shows all about that, like within the umbrella of identity to non-identity. And then as well, we're looking to take out artists of color from titles, so we can just have shows about different topics. And yes, we happen to be artists of color, but we're making shows about different and various topics.
Yeah, Natalia, and thanks for the word organizer. And I'm a union organizer, so I always think when what we're talking about here, and oh yeah, the organizing component of it is just exciting to me. Thank you so much. And Heidi, hopeful, what you feel?
Yeah, I am hopeful. I think, having maybe been around longer than some of the others, I've seen things come full circle. And what I'm hoping, or what I'm hopeful, is that that the circle is come around, and it's going to continue. You can't see me because I'm on radio, but we're not going to continue the circle, but that we're going to continue on an upward trend. I think what Natalia is saying, again, goes right back to my first statement about the outrage of not being kind of generally accepted in the main stage excellence for excellence sake, and creating exhibitions that are not identity themed but include artists of color and are putting them on the main stage is part of that. It's a huge part of that. And I have recently, stepped into a role on the board of the National Council for Education of the Ceramic Arts that Habiba was just mentioning, because I also have been going to that conference for over 10 years. And I'm very hopeful, that we are, that the organization is setting in place the kind of systemic change we need to sustain change. And I'm hopeful as I talk to other curators across the country. Yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm hearing good vibes. I think that there's a lot of will and good energy, and I think this time we might not just be passing through, but shifting really the paradigm.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. And then, but Magdalene, I got to remember that when the pandemic started, you had an installation raw clay, and the story after that was the just so I was like just thinking about like that having to leave an installation that's active and live that is virus pulling in a building was such a ghostly, haunting piece right at the
Yeah,
beginning of
it was
the pandemic.
it was such an odd sort of I don't know. It felt oddly prophetic, but obviously I'm not a prophet. It's not like I knew what was coming, but it was just this strange linking up between what was going on in the world and what had come out of my studio, what was going on in my mind, and therefore came out of the studio. Yeah, it was bizarre.
Yeah, and on that too, and with with all your work, I mean, I think of the environment, right? I think of Earth too, because like I can't have the conversation that we just had about hope and not think about Magdalene's virus and the but the encroachment, the ecological issues that we're seeing, because like in a certain sense, like I'm less hopeful about that. It is an emergency as well, but there's also rising awareness in that. Do you find yourselves as artists grappling with those, grappling with those questions as well? As far as the environment, your use of materials, and is that a large piece in what you do in your work? Or I guess what I'm saying is, here's why I want to get into, and I'm not going to make an assumption here. There's an idea within ethics and like the ethics of care and a feminine ethics theory that bring into the fact that you have to consider people, you have to consider the environment, you have to take pause and create space for that. I don't want to make the assumption. Is that part of a part? Do you see it as part of your work that you're doing?
I mean, for me, absolutely. That is one of the major reasons that I leave a lot of my work unfired, is the idea of not firing, not using the energy that it takes to fire the work, and not creating more permanent sort of leftovers from me being here. So with my unfired work, I reuse those materials over and over again. I've been using the same clay since 2017, I want to say. So for me, absolutely, it's a major consideration in the way I work. Yeah, I'll leave it at that and let other folks chime in.
I don't think like it's been super conscious for me. And if anything, it's been more about like community, like in the sense of the care of other people being able to benefit from the materials that I use. And so usually, like I don't fire a lot of work either. So often that clay gets donated to an institution, to a school, so that they can reclaim that clay and use it for mold making or whatever other processes that they'd like. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, but I don't think that it's been a super conscious decision, but it just tends to be a way that I work anyways. So.
Yeah, it's not part of my
Yeah.
work either, but it's something that I do think of because I here in America, uh, the communities that are most affected by pollution, tend to be brown and black people. So I do think of it in that, but it hasn't been part of my work yet. Not to say that it won't, but I think that I live my life at where I'm not the best at it, but I try consciously to do things, and I do think about my practice and the materials and the process that and the resources I'm using. So I'm a low fire, so I do think about how I don't want to take resources, and I don't partake in a lot of or have ever the wood firing or some of the soda or salt firing, just because I'm not interested in that, but I'm also not interested in the things that use the most resources. I do think that I want to use the things that are least impactful. So.
Yeah. Heidi, is it active consideration for you?
It's not an active consideration in my practice. I mean, I kind of make minimally. I'm not like profuse. I don't make a lot. I make targeted things for specific things. But I think more generally in my life, it certainly is a part of my life and my life values and in the values of the people around me. And I think globally, like just to get philosophical about it, Ken, for a second, globally, if humankind can't kind of get it together and, share vaccine recipes so that we can solve COVID internationally, how can we even possibly imagine that we might solve climate change because of the, kind of corporate greed and individualism that is sort of taking over. So that's a sort of a philosophical statement. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Well, that'll leave me. You promise you everybody promised me my big question: why is there something rather than nothing? So you promised me that. So it's a good segue for the philosophy. Heidi, why is there something rather than nothing?
Is that an existential question, or are we talking about art? I think I'm going to take that in the context of why make art and why why am I 20 years ago I was pushing paper in an office. So I think why is there something rather than nothing? I think that we have the opportunity to make people think and change and shift, and every artist in every medium has that opportunity. And it's just so important. I mean, and I've recently finished a piece about that tells the story of the Belfast Irish linen production factory. But it also, if you can read the fine print or you get to see the video that I made about the work, then you'll understand that it's about a lot more. It's about industrialization and the potato famine and the mass exodus of Irish immigrants and their marginalization in the world. So, an opportunity and an invitation to make art for an exhibition is always a chance. It's always a chance to say something to the world and to ask people to think about something they hadn't thought about. Which I'm going to take one more second and say I didn't get to your question around the fear of exoticization, and I think that is something that
Please do that.
Yeah, I have grappled with that somewhat because I am working with images of. In some of my work around beautiful exoticized images of Indian Caribbean women, and I am fearful that putting them out there will be misinterpreted, and so that's when the kind of the curation and the messaging. It's so important to have people who understand it communicate it properly.
Yeah, thank you. I'm realizing, Magdalene, that you're going to be in the position, if you do want to answer, you could go rogue. You can give a contradictory answer to the last time. You could say before the pandemic, this is why there's something rather than nothing. After the pandemic, now there's nothing rather than something. So what do you want to say, Magdalene? You've done it once.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what I said last time. And I think last time we were talking together, Ken, I think I said something like, I make something rather than nothing to be seen.
Yeah.
But I think it's broader than that. I think it's to be seen, but to look at things differently as well. To not only say, hey, here, I was here, but to also ask viewers to look at something from a different angle than they might have previously. So to be seen, but to reconsider what has been seen.
Yeah, I had a guest, Ana Del Rocio, a while back. She's going to be in a movie called Woman of Color, which is, by the way, mark it down, going to be a tremendous film. They got their Kickstarter passed, but so I was like, Anna, I was like, okay, so why is there something rather than nothing? She said, women, and that was it. So, Habiba, why is there something rather than nothing?
I guess I think about it like we've already seen what nothing looks like in terms of the way we've been not represented for a long time. Um, and I think there needs to be something not only for the obvious reasons of getting our narratives across and, fighting back against oppression, but also just to like shake up homogenized aesthetics and narratives that have gotten pretty stale. And I think that adding something can only make it better and make it more interesting. And in terms in a personal way, why there needs to be something. I think most artists have that is the drive to make, the drive to create. Um, I've kind of struggled over the years, but particularly last year with COVID and considering like maybe even not making art anymore. I had that moment of thinking like maybe I should switch careers completely, and what would that look like for me? And I had actually seriously started researching schools and other pathways. Um, and as soon as I started making again, I got this commission to make the cups that I mentioned, and even though that's so not in my wheelhouse of what I usually do, just doing that, getting back into making, started to make my brain work again in those ways that are so exciting to me. And I really was quickly confronted with that I'm someone who needs to make. Even if I take breaks from it, it's like a weird relationship where it's like sometimes I need space, but after a while I miss it, and I have the desire to think and to create things. So there will always need to be something.
I really appreciate your comment. It's just as far as me thinking, it's like the relationship bit of what you create with. I have a different relationship with each type of thing that I create, and I'm like, why? Like, the relationship. And I always think it's healthy to say, should I be doing this? I remember when the pandemic came down, I'm like, who the hell wants to listen to some dude talk about why is there something rather than nothing on their computer? Like, seriously, I mean, it's a good, legitimate question. Like, people are dying. So, great questions. Natalia, why is there something rather than nothing?
To be heard, to share, and to communicate, and to let people know I'm here and to connect.
Yeah. Thank you. We've been speaking with Magdalene Dykstra, Natalia Arbelaez, Habiba El-Sayed, and Heidi McKenzie. I want to tell you, obviously there's a lot more to be said. I wanted to particularly and directly let you know that I've been honored by your willingness and bravery just to come on here and talk about this. I love the work that you're doing. I saw the presentation you saw on disrupting the canon. I thought it was amazing. The frustration I felt with it was what I assume your frustration with is, like, look at this amazing person and let me do it for 5 minutes, but also let me talk about my work, and also let me talk about the canon, and also let me talk about disrupting the canon. So part of this is just let's have the full conversation. And I wanted to thank each of you deeply for doing that. I just wanted to let you know that directly.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Thank you for having us on.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing,